All right, amazing. So we have a lot of topics that we're actually exploring today. We're going to be doing some Canadian inventions, inventors, space technology, Nobel Prize winners, and generally a few different Canadian scientists that we're going to be exploring today. So the first thing, we're going to log into poll.ev just like you did last time. Oops. And all you're going to do is go to pollev.com/KaylaLambie679. And then you are going to put in your answers. I'm going to see if I can bring up the chat as well, so I can put in the link so it's a little bit easier for you to just copy and amazing. And we have another person. We've got a few more. Hello, newcomers. We're just doing a little bit of a poll right now to see if anybody knows any Canadian scientists or Nobel Prize winners. And so far, it seems like we haven't gotten anything. If you want to answer, feel free to go look in the chat. There is a link that I just keep sending because when somebody new joins in, you don't get the link unless you are in the meeting while it's being sent. Okay, well, so far, it seems like nobody yet has any information about these. So we're going to explore that a little bit right now. Make sure to keep the link open and handy, because we will be looking at this a little bit more in a second. And to anybody who just joined, we are doing a few different topics today. We're going to be exploring some scientists. We're going to be exploring space a little bit and a few other topics. Amazing. Okay, so in this section, what we're going to be doing is you're going to be learning about a few different scientists. As we just make sure everybody's inside. Perfect. So we're just going to be learning about a few different scientists, some of their contributions. As we're going along, you can take a few notes and make sure to write down the names of anybody that you find interesting to yourself, because we're going to be using this in a little bit. So the first person that we're going to be talking about is Lapchi Su, and he actually did something really, really neat. And his team identified the gene behind cystic fibrosis. I'm not sure if anybody knows what that is. Thumbs up in chat if you do, or a check mark if you do, and an X if you do not know what cystic fibrosis is or why it's interesting. Check marks or thumbs up for you do, and X's if you do not. Got 2 X's so far. We are talking about whether or not you know what cystic fibrosis is, or why it's interesting, or what the diagram means. All right. So it seems like nobody really knows what cystic fibrosis is, and it is a disease that happens. And basically what happens is your lungs start to fill up with extra fluid. So it's kind of like, imagine that you're constantly being filled with water, like your lungs are filled with water all of the time. And unfortunately, this is a hereditary disease. So it is passed on from your parents. Your parents do not even know that they have the gene, which is something really, really interesting. And this is one of the most important things about the identification of this gene, because we can now tell if your parents have 1 copy of this gene, you have a chance, if the other parent also has a copy of this gene, to get cystic fibrosis. So one of the things that we often do is look into people's genetic history, and we assess whether or not there are certain risks that they will have based on having a child. So in this case, As you can see in the image over here, the mother is a carrier, which means she has the gene, and the father is also a carrier, which means he has the gene. Neither one of them actually have cystic fibrosis, that disease that basically acts as if it's filling your lungs with kind of mucus or water. And 3 of their children don't have it. 2 of them are carriers, and 1 of them does have cystic fibrosis. And it's a little bit hard sometimes when you have recessive disorders, which is kind of what this is, to make sure that you're being safe and your children that you have don't have these diseases. So his team was able to identify the gene behind cystic fibrosis. So if you think that scientist is interesting, write down his name, or at least remember it. And then we're going to be going on to the next one. All right, so our next scientist is Arthur B. McDonald. He is a 2015 Nobel Prize winner in physics, and he was able to discover and demonstrate that neutrinos need to have mass. So basically, neutrinos are tiny little particles that kind of act like electrons, but they don't interact with electromagnetism. Do you know what an electron is? Check marks for you, X's for you don't. Or do you know what neutrinos are? We'll start with electrons. Check marks or thumbs up if you know what an electron is. We got thumbs up, which is good. More X's. I'm going to quickly explain what an electron is. We're going to cover a lot of topics really, really quickly today. We already started with genetics. So in a molecule or in an atom, we have our protons, which are the plus part, and we also have neutrons, which are the neutral part. And then on the outside, we have these things called electrons, and these are all negative. And the interesting thing that Arthur B. McDonald learned when he was looking up the difference in terms of neutrinos is he was actually understanding how they kind of act and how they act as neutral particles and how they are in some ways similar to electrons, but they don't necessarily interact the same way. So that's one of the cool things that he was able to explore and win the actual Nobel Prize for. And remember to write down their names if you find them interesting. We're going to be going over them in a second. So our next scientist is Frederick Banting, and he won the Nobel Prize in 1923 for discovering a way to basically harvest insulin. Prior to this, it was really hard to actually harvest insulin from anywhere, and they weren't necessarily sure how to do so. One of the things that was really interesting is being able to produce this really, really helped elongate the lifestyle and the life of people with diabetes. Check marks in chat if you know what diabetes is, or thumbs up. Seems like we've got a better understanding of diabetes. Awesome. Do you know what insulin is? Got less check marks for insulin. So diabetes is a disease that influences people and you can't regulate your blood sugar correctly. And the reason for that is your body doesn't create insulin, or your body has receptors that kind of interact with insulin, and those are broken. So there are 2 types of diabetes. So we've got type 1, where your body just doesn't make insulin. And then we have type 2, where your body makes insulin, but then the actual receptors for the insulin don't fit the insulin anymore, or they don't kind of work together. So either way, it's like your body isn't able to use insulin to regulate itself. So in the cases of where people have not enough insulin, what you can actually do is you can inject insulin into the body. And insulin is just like a hormone that you can use and inject to make sure that things are kind of working correctly. So the hard part of dealing with this is prior to Frederick Banting and his team, they were unable to actually create insulin. So the way that he was able to do this is he was basically able to take an animal, force them to produce insulin, and then stop the insulin from being broken down. And once you do that, you can start to harvest all the insulin out and then give it to people. There are now synthetic ways of creating and making insulin, but he was the first one to ever kind of invent this way to harvest it and make something that people can use so that they're able to treat their type 1 diabetes for the most part. There are some people with type 2 diabetes that do need insulin as well, but they are kind of in a smaller percentage compared to the type 1 diabetes. Check marks or thumbs up if the idea of insulin and why it's important to be able to make insulin makes sense to you. Awesome. And this was Frederick Banting. And if you ever met somebody who takes insulin, he was kind of the fundamental thought leader on that. So we're going to go into some different types of scientists soon as well, and different types of people in the sciences as I try to not have this. There we go. Okay. So the next one is Roberta Bondar, and she was the first Canadian woman and neurologist in space. And a lot of kind of young Canadians were able to be inspired by her. She was the first woman generally that we see in terms of space travel, which is really, really interesting. And there's a lot of kind of history around Canadian space travel and her team. So this is one of my favorite Canadian scientists and researchers and people generally in science to show off. So Roberta Bondar is the first Canadian woman in space. All right, Donna Strickland is really interesting as well. So she was able to earn the Nobel Prize for Physics, and she was able to do this for developing the chirp pulse amplification technique that was able to generate high intensity, ultra short optical pulses. So there's very, very specific situations in where this is used, but she was also one of the very few women who have been able to win the Nobel Prize, and she did so in physics. And again, one more time, if there's anybody that particularly piques your interest, make sure to write their name down. I'm going to have a little thing at the end where you pick your favorite one. All right, and I have two people that aren't necessarily directly just in science, but I wanted to show a little bit of how you can interact with science and the STEM general fields in a different way. So the first person that you see on this slide is Tamara Huggins, and she's helped Black and female tech founders raise over $1.1 million to launch their tech startups in Canada. So this is somebody that I found really, really interesting, because not only do they kind of take the ideas of local people and Canadians and women and certain minorities, but they also helped them create their own businesses. So this is one person that I found interesting. And the second one is Sadia Mustaf. And she was able to found Tech Girls in Canada. And this is one of the organizations that I've seen generally in a few different situations where I am. And this is a little place where Canadian women can interact with STEM fields, and STEM meaning science, technology, engineering, and math. And basically all of these women are able to come together and interact in a way and build their own businesses and create their own network. So one more time, I'm going to go quickly through all of the different people, and I want you to think about the one person that you are most interested in learning a little bit more about. So we have Lapchi Sui, which is the person who identified cystic fibrosis, a specific gene. We have Arthur B. McDonald, who had a Nobel Prize in physics. We have Frederick Banting, who discovered the idea of kind of harvesting and creating insulin for the first time. Roberta Bondar, the first Canadian woman in space. Donna Strickland, who was a Nobel Prize winner in physics. We have Tamara Huggins, who helped minority women become tech entrepreneurs, and Sadia Mustaf, who was able to help a variety of different women in STEM fields kind of get their bearings and develop a network. So hopefully you all have an idea of whoever you think is the most interesting. And in a second, this is going to load up. And again, you can go to that same URL that we had last time, so pollev.com. And then we're going to go to Kayla Lambie 679. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to put in your answers. Make sure to write down who you've gotten the most interest in. There is no right, wrong answer. It's all just opinions. Seems like most of you have submitted. If you need an extra minute or so, put a check mark or a thumbs up or some kind of icon in the chat, and then we can wait a few more minutes. All right, amazing. It seems like we have a nice little spread between different people and what you all find interesting and what you want to explore, which is really neat. If you hear a cat, that's because my cat is seeing another cat friend who is outside. So you start hearing a cat, that is what that's from. All right, perfect. So hopefully once you put in your answer, make sure you write down the name of whoever you're looking at, and we're gonna move on to the next section. All right, so what I would like you to do is we're only gonna do a quick Google search for your Canadian, and you're just gonna write down a few interesting things that you found about them, and then we're gonna share it on a board kind of in the same way we did before about your specific person. So we're only gonna take about 5 to 10 minutes to do that. We are nicely on schedule for this. So what I would like you to do now is start to look up the person that you wrote about, and then we're going to, as a class, come together and start to share those ideas. So we'll say at about 8:25, we're gonna come back together and we are going to explore this all together. If you have any questions, feel free to throw those questions in the chat, but you have until 8:25 to start exploring a little bit on your own. And then we're gonna share that as anchor. If you happen to find a few more interesting things than 2, feel free to write those down. Preferably don't have more than about 10, and then pick the ones that you find the most interesting, maybe put a star beside them. You might want to share those with the class. All right, you've got about 3 minutes left to finish exploring and reading, and then we're going to come back together. Hello, Zoe. Are you rejoining or did you just join?
Rejoin.
Okay, perfect. So you know what's going on. Amazing. All right, so we've got our last minute. So start to wrap up whatever you're reading or looking at. Make sure to write down your key points. You might actually want to write them down on your computer so you can just kind of copy and paste them into the poll.ev where you're going to be sharing your answers. I'm going to show you in the next slide how I'd like you to do that so we can keep everything a little organized and everybody will know what to do. So just to let you all know, once you're ready, the way that I'd like you to write it is write the person's last name and then something interesting you learned. So in this format. If you don't have the dash, whoever did the first one, thank you for being so speedy. But don't worry. And this is the format we're writing it in. So again, try to write at least 2 each. And we're gonna go over all the different things. So the first one that's coming up is Banting actually sold his car for research. I'm assuming that's to get a little bit more money for his research. Roberta Bondar, her father built a lab in the basement where she frequently conducted experiments. That's pretty interesting. I don't think I have enough space in my basement to really build a lab. Tamara was honored as Canada's top 150 Black women, creating an impact across the nation. That's pretty neat. Lapchi, who was once the president of the University of Hong Kong. I did not know that. That's really interesting. Bondar was also a certified skydiver, underwater diver, and private pilot. Banting received the Nobel Prize at age 32 and remained the youngest Nobel laureate in the area of physiology and medicine. MacDonald, his doctoral advisor, was future Nobel laureate William Fowler. Banting sold the insulin patent for $1. That's one thing that I was always amazed at, is he didn't really want to, he wasn't out for the money. He really wanted insulin to really take over and everybody who was sick to have access to it. So he continued his research and teaching in the hospital for sick kids at U of T. Arthur is finding out how clock works at age 5. That's interesting. I'm assuming he took it apart to figure that out. Muzaffar, in 2017, she was featured in Canada's 150 Women, a book about 150 of the most influential and groundbreaking women in Canada. That's pretty neat. Bondar was the first astronaut to receive a star on Canada's Walk of Fame. I did not know that. That's super cool. See all of the cool things that you can get by getting into science. Lapchi contributed to the study of the characterization of chromosome 7. I didn't actually know the chromosome where cystic fibrosis was found on, so that's pretty interesting. I'm assuming he did a lot of chromosomal mapping to figure out cystic fibrosis. Banting studied plastic surgery. That's interesting. He also tested insulin on himself. It's probably easier to get ethical approval if you test on yourself. I'm not sure if any of you know about how difficult it is to get ethical approval, especially in invasive style studies, but that would be a lot easier. There are a few different scientists that have actually done that, and they've been so invested in their research that they didn't want to go through the ethical board, so they just do the study on themselves. It's not necessarily optimal, but it is definitely something that people have done in the past. All right, can I see check marks in chat if you've already finished your 1 or 2 points, preferably 2 points about your person? Banting was killed in an air disaster. That's unfortunate. So far, I've got 1 thumbs up. So we're gonna spend a little bit longer to make sure that everything's done. We had 3 so far. Banting during the research killed more than 10 dogs. That sometimes happens when you do this type of a research. So basically, in his research, what he ended up doing was figuring out that pigs were one of the best sources for insulin, and that's where we started to get insulin from for a really long time. He tested on a variety of different animals to see the ones that would produce the most insulin. And it turns out that pigs were the easiest, most kind of reliable source of insulin in a large amount. And basically they inject the pig with a certain amount of kind of hormones, and then they break down certain other hormones in the pig's, I think it's liver, can't remember off the top of my head. And basically then they harvest all of the insulin directly from there. So it's not a particularly easy thing to do, but it's definitely something that's super important. All right. Any last comments? Closing this in about 10 seconds. So get in your last statements. All right. Good work, everybody. I learned some stuff, definitely, about some of the researchers. All right. And we're going to go over a few interesting Canadian inventions for the next section. So now that we've learned a little bit, now that we've learned a little bit about some Canadian scientists, and you have a little bit of a background in a few things, we're also going to learn about a few different interesting inventions.
There's some incredible people over the years, and those people have produced some equally incredible inventions. You might know some of the obvious ones, like, say, ice hockey, goalie masks for hockey, instant replay for hockey, poutine for eating after hockey, table hockey to play more hockey, the jockstrap for hockey, or basketball. You might not.
If you're not familiar, hockey is a pretty important sport in Canada. We really like hockey.
Know that some Canadian innovations are absolutely critical for modern life, have little to do with ice. Here are just a few of the most notable. 1. Peanut butter. In the late 19th century, Marcellus Gilmore Edson from Montreal patented an edible spread made of roasted peanuts ground into a semi-fluid and mixed with sugar. Doesn't sound so appetizing put that way, but as anyone with 2 slices of bread and some jam would attest, it's well worth it.
Question. If you have made peanut butter yourself, can you put a check mark in the chat? I personally love to make peanut butter myself, and I'm not sure if anybody else does, or if it's really a big food where you guys live. Nobody's made peanut butter? Wow. It's really easy if you ever get the chance. You just take peanuts and put them in the blender. You add a little bit of salt, a little bit of sugar maybe. You don't have to, and you have peanut butter. It's really, really easy.
Thanks to Mr. Edson, people around the world enjoy a protein-rich snack. 2. Plexiglass. While technically discovered earlier, it was William Chalmers, a McGill graduate student, whose synthesizing of methyl methacrylate made practical manufacturing of plexiglass possible. And like everything invented in 1931, it was put to military use in about 1 million ways over the next 15 years before finding its peacetime place in aquariums, lenses for glasses, and a truly Canadian use, hockey rink glass. 3. Checked luggage. It was John Michael Lyons of Moncton, New Brunswick, who first thought of attaching a ticket to a traveler's baggage so it could be stowed later. Little did he know that he'd be creating a key feature of airports before airplanes were even a thing. He also didn't know that people would eventually try to avoid using his invention as much as possible. Oh well. Number 4, egg cartons. Before 1911, eggs used to be carried in baskets. Then, Joseph Coyle, a newspaper editor in BC, invented the egg carton to solve a dispute between a farmer and his client who complained of always being delivered broken eggs. Frankly, the whole thing sounds like an Alice Munro short story. Anyways, now our eggs are usually intact when we buy them. 5. Insulin. Yeah, this one's pretty important. In the 20s, a Canadian foursome of Banting, Best, McLeod, and Collett figured out how to extract insulin for medicinal use and consequently save the lives of millions and millions of diabetics. 2 of them won the Nobel Prize for their discovery, and being generous boys, they shared their prizes with the remaining pair. 6. Radio. Though a great number of different scientists were barking up the electromagnetic wave tree, the Canadian Reginald A. Fessenden was the first to ever successfully send audio. If that wasn't enough, a few years later, he became the first to make a public radio broadcast. Thanks, Reg.
So, those are a few different examples of some fun inventions. This video was my favorite in terms of the different inventions that I saw. And a lot of them, I'm sure that you have used some of these things before, whether or not it's radio, or if you've ever gone on a plane before and you've used checked luggage, or if you've ever eaten peanut butter. These are all different things that were invented by various Canadians, and there was a little bit of a backstory to that. All right. And what I would love for you guys to do is we've got another one of these little guys. So we're going to first write down the ones that we already know. And if you happen to know any other Canadian inventions, feel free to add them to the list. Needle. So we definitely had 6 in the video. So hopefully we can get the first 6 down. You can also go back to the specific ones. So we do have a radio, which is great. Bigger radio. So we've got peanut butter, and radio. What are the other 4 that we had? Still got peanut butter and radio. Glass, specifically plexiglass. We have luggage, so stowaway luggage, which was an interesting one. There was also a bonus one at the beginning, if you were listening to that. There was a few bonus ones to do with hockey at the start. Basketball, yeah. Garbage. I'm not sure if Canadians invented garbage, but perhaps. Checked luggage. Any idea of the other ones? There was one to do with eggs, if you remember that one. Wheelchairs, awesome. We did invent hockey. The pacemaker is another one, awesome. Whoever did that. Do we remember the egg one? So we probably invented pucks as well. That makes sense to me. The paint roller. So there was the egg carton as well, amazing. There was also a few at the beginning that talked about hockey, one of which was to do with how we watch something. Egg, needle, paint roller, egg carton. So we have most of them here. We do also have insulin, which is one that we looked up before as well. Fiberglass. Goalie masks, definitely. Definitely. Cool. So we also invented insulin, which is one of the ones. It was also at the beginning, if you've ever had video replay, that was one of the ones that was mentioned at the very, very start. So all video replay was also created as a little Canadian invention. Awesome. And the fun thing about inventions is no matter what country you're from, you can always find a bunch of cool inventions that you or somebody from your country has made. So I also recommend that you guys all on your own time look up the inventions that people from your country has made as well, because it's lots of fun to kind of explore the different things and to learn a little bit more about yourself and the background that you've come from. Awesome. So thank you all for going through that. The next section, we're going to be going through a little bit of space exploration. I'm sure that you've all seen kind of the billionaire space race in a little bit, but prior to all of that, most space exploration was primarily done by large government institutions, which was all amazing. And we're going to watch a few different videos and a few different sections exploring a little bit about space exploration. There's tons of different countries that actually went through and explored space. And there's tons and tons of really, really interesting inventions that actually came from space exploration. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch this first one. And as you watch the video, I want you to think about whether or not space exploration is a good idea, a bad idea, and whether or not you think it's actually a waste of money. A lot of the time, we often think about space exploration as something cool, but think about the amount of money that it actually costs to send a few lucky individuals up into space for not a super long period of time, and what they're actually able to do up there, and whether or not you think that all of the work and all of the time and effort is worth actually going through all of this.
This episode was made possible by Wix. Build your own professional website with Wix by following the link below. If you're interested in space exploration, you've probably had a conversation with someone who thinks it's a waste of time and money. Why would we go to space when we can't even take care of our current home? Why should we spend money to visit other planets when there are starving children around the world? To be fair, these are reasonable questions. In this episode, we're going to address those concerns and discuss whether space exploration is a productive way to spend our valuable resources. Let's start with the idea that money spent on space missions is money down the drain. NASA's budget for the past several years has hovered around 0.5% of the total US discretionary budget, a little under $21 billion. Sounds like a lot of money. We could spend that money to build shelters or schools or something, right? Sure, but let's look at some other areas of spending that might also contribute. Consumers spent $22.8 billion on McDonald's last year, over $2 billion more than NASA gets. In 2017, in the US alone, people spent $120 billion on tobacco, mainly cigarettes. That's 6 times NASA's annual budget. Now, if we compare these 3 areas of spending, which do you think contributes more to society? What does our spending on McDonald's give us? A quick lunch and insane rates of obesity. What about tobacco? Just cancer, really. What about space missions? Nothing much. Just weather satellites, GPS, LED lighting, water purification systems, home insulation, wireless headsets, freeze-dried food, the modern smoke detector, the computer mouse, and countless other incredibly useful tools and facets of modern society that we take for granted today.
All right, we're going to go back over that part one more time, just to make sure that you saw all of the different cool things that space travel has done. So it's added to water purification. So that's actually going through and making sure that your water is clean. Without space travel, we wouldn't have had water purification. Oops, we're gonna go back. Because it ran away. Oh no. And we're gonna go over to water purification. Oh no.
Just weather satellites, GPS.
So we've got weather satellites as well. GPS, I'm sure we all have used GPS. Hopefully I'm sure you all know what GPS means. LED lighting. LED lighting being the small lights often that you see in things and anything that's extremely efficient.
LED lighting, water purification systems, home insulation.
Home insulation. So a lot of the insulation that we now use was developed from space travel. Previous, we used different types of insulation that may not have been as effective or as cost effective.
And wireless headsets.
Wireless headsets. I'm sure we've all used wireless headsets. If any of you have AirPods, those are all in part created based on space travel.
That's freeze-dried food.
And freeze-dried food is something really, really interesting. If you've ever seen those little packs of food that come freeze-dried, you can actually create ice cream from a little tiny container this big. And it's all freeze-dried, so it will keep basically forever. And we also have smoke detectors. So I know all of these things don't really sound like they came from space travel. Also the ballpoint pen, that was one of the first big ones that actually came from space travel. But without that, none of these things would exist, and potentially our lives would be a little bit different.
The modern smoke detector, the computer mouse, and countless other incredibly useful tools and facets of modern society that we take for granted today. Every year, NASA releases a publication called Spin-Off, which catalogs civilian uses of technology developed by NASA or in partnership with them.
This is a really, really interesting thing. Prior to actually doing this presentation, I went on, looked off a bunch of the things from Spin-Off. I highly recommend doing it as well. It's really neat to see all the inventions and the things that were created because of space travel, just from NASA. Remember that there's tons of different global organizations that do space travel, but NASA is often seen as one of the biggest ones that gets kind of touted.
The list is extensive and includes a number of technologies that greatly reduce the amount of suffering in places like Africa, where clean water is hard to come by. So the next time someone claims that we're wasting money that could be spent on improving lives here on Earth, remind them of all the tools that have been developed as a direct result of the space industry. Even based on this one point, space exploration is objectively not a waste of money because it contributes so much more useful technology than many other industries. As with a lot of things, people have this noble, misguided idea that we could reallocate money from some source of spending to help solve problems around the world. For example, they'll say things like, we could dig 1,000 wells with that amount of money. The idea is nice, but it's naive. Do you really think if we didn't allocate 0.5% of the budget to space research, it would be spent on humanitarian endeavors instead? Of course not. It would likely be tossed into the enormous defense budget to be spent on fighter jets or Tomahawk missiles. This is like when you didn't finish your dinner as a kid and your mother would say, there are starving kids who would love to eat that. Well, yeah, that's true, but what exactly am I supposed to do about it? I can't exactly mail them my leftover broccoli. With space spending, it's an even more ridiculous claim because the technology we develop for space missions is directly and measurably benefiting at-risk and struggling populations around the world. So really, not spending the money on the space industry would be decidedly worse than spending it and letting the technology find civilian uses. Another big complaint some critics have is that we treat the Earth so poorly and we've done so much damage already that it should be our #1 priority. We can all agree on this point. We have been poor stewards of our home planet. We have floating islands of trash in the oceans. We're speeding up climate change at an alarming rate thanks to fossil fuel use and industrial animal farming. We're already experiencing the consequences of a radically damaged global climate. And we think we'd do it better elsewhere in the universe? It's a fair point, but only on the surface. Yes.
And this is something really interesting that actually relates to what's going on right now, is a lot of the kind of billionaires like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos that are going into space and really exploring all of these ideas are actually looking to see and potentially think about settling on different planets. And this idea is something really interesting. Should we make sure that we're facilitating people going to space and looking for potentially settling on different planets? Or should we take care of our own a little bit more? That's just something for you personally to think about, and whether or not the government should allow these people to go into space. It is their money, but it's something interesting to think about.
Our greed and consumerism has done likely irreparable harm to the Earth. But you know how we can help? By switching to renewable energy sources like solar. And you know where we figure out the best ways to manufacture and implement super efficient solar technology? The freezing vacuum of space. Thanks to the space industry, we're able to utilize and benefit from incredibly efficient solar arrays here on Earth, helping reduce the need for energy from fossil fuels. In the future, we could slowly move our manufacturing off the Earth and into space to further reduce our environmental impact. On a slightly unrelated note, if someone says space exploration is a waste of money because we're destroying the Earth, remind them to vote for representatives that have a strong green energy platform. If we elect politicians that respect the Earth, the situation will gradually improve, and we'll see more renewable energy replacing fossil fuels, and we'll leave the Earth a greener place for future generations, which will allow them the luxury of really applying their minds to more advanced challenges of space exploration. Another response to the idea that leaving the Earth is a waste of money is that, as far as we know, we're the only sentient life in the entire universe. If someday a massive planet-killing asteroid comes our way, that's it. Our species, as well as every other species on Earth, is done for. What greater cause could we find than the continuation of our species? I guess you could say, if everyone is dead, then no one is suffering, but that doesn't really count. By spending the money on space missions today, we're building the groundwork for future generations to establish colonies elsewhere in the solar system, giving humanity a backup in case the Earth gets obliterated in a freak natural disaster or nuclear war. And finally, possibly the most honest answer to the question of why bother leaving the Earth is just because that's what we do. Humans have always explored. What's over that mountain? What's across this ocean? We overcome obstacles not because we have to, but because we want to. We have this innate drive to learn, to explore, to become the best version of ourselves. And space exploration is the natural extension of our storied history of adventure and knowing the unknown. So the next time you have a discussion with someone who thinks that space exploration is pointless, you have some answers.
And we're actually going to end this video there. There are also different reasons that you could personally think about and develop on your own for reasons against space travel. Obviously, this specific video had a very positive view on space travel, but it's important to always think about the potential biases in videos that you're exploring and watching. And in this case, this video is obviously a little bit biased towards space exploration. So in the next slide, where we're talking about whether or not you personally think that space exploration is worth it, what I would like you to think about is also taking into consideration the potential bias from this video. So the first one that I would like you all to write about is whether or not just fundamentally you think that humans should explore space. Do you think it's fair to send people up into space and potentially have them die? There's been quite a few astronauts who have ended up dying because of going into space and things just didn't end up working out. We do spend a lot of money on space travel. Obviously, there are potential environmental concerns in terms of space fuel and how much energy and effort it takes to go up. You could also even think about it from the billionaire perspective. What are all of the space organizations that are created from non-governmental organizations actually giving? Are they creating technology that they would give freely to people around the world? All of these things you can think about before answering. But it seems like most people are, or everybody so far, has agreed that space travel is interesting and we should explore space. We probably have one person who's anti-space travel. Stay home, stay safe. Don't waste your money. All right. Awesome work so far, everybody. And we're going to go to the next one. That's not the next one.
This episode was made possible.
That's not the next one. So for this one, what I would like you to do is think about the specific reasons why you actually think that. What is the most convincing reason why humans should go to space or not? So in this one, you just put the word yes, and then your reason for your answer. You can use one from the video, or you can also use one that you personally believe or have an idea about before. You're also free to write a nuanced take. You can write yes in some circumstances and then no in others. It is all up to you. Make sure you write yes or no at the beginning so I know the idea. So I've got one, I'm assuming it's for a yes, looking for an alternative to live for human beings. So making sure that we have somewhere else to live. If for some reason a giant asteroid comes and hits the Earth and it explodes, and unfortunately we have nowhere else to live. Or if, humans decide to nuke everyone. We've got one for yes to see if there are other life forms. Most people who are scientists believe statistically, if the universe is the size that we think it is, there is other life. Whether or not it is sentient is up for debate, but it's almost guaranteed that there's some other life form somewhere else in the universes. Yes, we can find out the amazingness of, I'm assuming that is the world. And yeah, we can find out lots of cool things regarding this world and making it a better place. To explore the unknown and bring benefits for humans. We've got yes, discover some strange things happening out on other planets and make sure to understand more about our planet. Yep. And we have somebody saying no, because waste a lot of money and the money could be used to build schools or anything that can make the world better. And we've got another yes, that humans should not confine their sights to the Earth. You can also think about the idea of like satellites and whether or not we should be putting satellites up in space. We've got yes, by exploring space, people will face a lot of problems which we haven't known, and maybe the solution can be used to solve problems on Earth. There are lots of cool things that have been discovered because we've actually been into space. Obviously, one of the most interesting ones is being able to take pictures, really, really nice pictures and resolution of things actually going on Earth. In a big portion of that is from satellites, but we also have the whole idea of just proving the shape of the Earth, what everything looks like, going to the moon, understanding what kind of that planet or that moon looks like. We have yes, it helps develop renewable energy and other cool inventions that are significant for us to use. I agree, lots of cool inventions have come from space travel. Some that we don't even consider, You know, I think, you know, even the idea of wireless headsets, that's something that a lot of us use every day. Same thing with the radio. I can't necessarily imagine radio not being invented in the same way that it was. Yes. Have a chance to understand the world in a different way and invent new and useful technology. Awesome. Yes, we may discover new types of creatures and explore what things really go on besides our planet. Yes, that would definitely be really interesting to see if we have anything else. There is also the idea of whether or not we have any planets close to us that would actually be suitable for humans, because basically we can't live on any planets currently around us to make sure that we actually have all the necessities of life. And we've been sending out certain kind of probes and things like that to explore whether or not we will be able to live on certain planets or what we would need to do it. But for the most part, it has seemed pretty difficult for all of these things. And we have yes to predict the trail of a meteorite. That's an interesting idea as well. So prediction and figuring out whether or not we can track certain things is all interesting. Thumbs up if you have not yet written your answer and you're still working on it. Really great answers. Oh, we've got another one. Yes, space technologies improve products we use every day, weather forecasts, and communications worldwide. Awesome. And again, this is an opinion piece, so there's no necessarily like right or wrong answer. It's all just about how you think about it. There is an argument for both sides, but there are lots of good reasons for space travel that we don't often think. Thank you, everybody, for your answers. We're going to go on to the next section. Whoop. All right. So there's something that Canadians actually made specifically in space. I know this will sound a little silly, but we created something called the Canadarm. And basically what this is a giant space arm. And this is one of the biggest contributions that Canadians have made to space travel. I'm going to show you a few different video clips and we're going to explore something in a second related to that. Depending on how much time we have left, we might also do an activity related to this. And I will teach you a few ideas regarding potentially introduction to coding.
Contributed by the Canadian Space Agency, the Canadarm2 is now an invaluable part of the International Space Station. Hi, I'm Rebecca Brayton and welcome to WatchMojo.com. And today we'll be checking out the simulator astronauts use to train themselves to use this tool. So as I understand it, there's two different Canadarms, the Canadarm1 and the Canadarm2. What is the difference between each of these?
One was built more in the 80s. The other one was sent up there in 2001. Main difference is the shuttle arm, the one on the space shuttle, comes back to Earth after a shuttle mission, whereas the Canadarm2 on the space station is there permanently. So every part has to be replaceable on orbit or in space.
So that's something to just note. So the first one was made back in the 80s. You got to think that's about 40 years ago, the first one was made. And the more recent arm, the version 2, was made in the 2000s. And it basically just stays up there forever. And whenever it breaks, they replace the parts.
What is the Canadarm2 designed to do?
Its main purpose is to build the space station, so assemble something. Without it, it wouldn't be possible to build the space station.
How are the astronauts trained to use it?
Every astronaut who uses the Canadarm2 comes here for a 2-week training session. We do what we call unloaded, so just moving the arm without anything on it. And we also do loaded operations, which is with a payload or a component of the space station.
This may sound like a simplistic question, but how does it work?
It's an arm with joints, a little bit similar to, I guess, to our arm. It has 7 joints on it. They're basically electric motors with gearboxes. Runs on about 1200 watts of power, the same power as a hairdryer. And the largest thing it can move is the space shuttle. What we have here is the interface they have on the space station that Julie Payette has used to control the arm. We have camera views from the arm, from the space station, and from the space shuttle. We have the 2 joysticks, or hand controllers as we call them, to control the arm. And we have the laptop, which is the principal interface. We also have this panel here with the green buttons to control some of the cameras and control some of the functions on the arm. I'm going to go in with the end of the arm and go grab a specialized fixture. So I'm going to start just putting in a command to move the arm. and it's going to move somewhat slowly. It's one of the important things that we teach here is try to be smooth in your inputs. And essentially what we're trying to do is keep the white dot within the white circle and the green crosshairs on the black circle. And we want to get the tips of the white lines on each end here between the red lines. What we're going to do is pull the trigger down here, and that's going to start an auto sequence to capture the fixture. It's going to start drawing it in, and we're going to get a solid in payload, and then the capture is complete. Now the next step would be pulling it out. What it's doing here is at the end of the arm, there's three cables that are going around the shaft that comes out of the specialized fixture that lines us up. And then there's a mechanism that draws in the end and then makes sure that we have a solid end. That's how the arm moves objects. It has to have a specialized fixture.
All right. So hopefully that made some sense in terms of what it looks like and how it works. So I'm just going to show you a quick drawing that I'm going to do. So we have our space station here. And basically the Canadarm is a long section here that has these kind of joint areas so that the arm can actually move in any direction. So if it needs to move this direction, it can move this way. And at each one of the joints, it's able to flex in a certain direction. And there are multiple little joints that allow a variety of motion. And then at the bottom, there's kind of like a little hand almost that allows the picking up and putting down of specific pieces of the space station. So again, this is aimed to help build and create the space station and anything else needed on that. All right, and in addition to that, we do have a famous Canadian. I was lucky enough to actually meet him at the Ontario Science Museum when I went one day, which was very interesting. And if you haven't heard of him, his name is...
A spaceship is coming, and we need to go catch it with Canadarm 2. I'm going to show you where we operate Canadarm from and what it looks like to be a robotic operator on the International Space Station. If you want to operate a robot, it's nice to be able to see what you're doing. The space station is one special place for windows called the cupola, and that's where we fly Canadarm 2 from to grab the dragon. Let me show you.
So this is them actually looking out through the window of space. And you can actually see kind of the Earth below, which is really neat.
Here inside the cupola are all of the controls necessary in order to operate and see what you're doing with the Canadarm. Let me show you what we have. Here in the center, we have one computer interface that shows all of the displays necessary to operate it. Over here on the right, we have the rotational hand controller. Here on the left, we have the translational hand controller to move things up and down. And then across, we have 3 screens that show various camera views around the outside of the space station, so you can see what you're doing. And the last thing is the manual control panel that has a way to control cameras, a way to set up the arm into different modes, make sure you have everything set through a nice simple interface so that you can operate Canadarm with confidence and assurance to let it do its job. To operate Canadarm, you need to have your body stable. And so there's a place you can stick your feet. Not too complicated. Tuck my toes in here. And now my hands are stable, my body's stable, and I'm all set to operate Canadarm 2. Extremely lucky not only to be able to live and work in this place, but also to be the people who operate Canadarm 2. Canada built the Canadarm 2, and Canadarm 2 built this space station. Everybody should be proud of that.
And just so you all know, this is not just a Canadian space station, this is an international space station. But it was specifically the Canadarm that was actually creating a lot of the specific components and putting them all together on the space station, which is pretty neato. Oops. We're gonna press pause on this guy. And this is all filmed in outer space. So if you're wondering how they're getting these pictures and this video and why he needs to put his feet in the specific location when he's moving it, that's because there's little gravity because they are in space in this video. All right, so we do have a little bit of time left. And one of the things that I wanted to show you and I wanted to ask a little bit about is there is a little kind of activity that I was going to get you guys to do with me relating to the Canadarm. So before we kind of jump in, does anybody have, or how many people have had experience either coding or using Scratch? Put a check mark or a thumbs up if you have background, especially in Scratch.
Scratch.
Yeah, Scratch. We've got some people. So I'm going to stop my screen share just for a second. And we're going to actually be exploring a little bit in terms of Scratch and something to do with the Canadarm related to this specific project. Before we continue on, does anybody have any questions about the Canadarm or anything related to what we've kind of been exploring so far? Doesn't look like it. It's like everybody is doing amazing, which is great. Just opening it up. Give me a second. Almost loaded. I'm going to send a set of code in the chat, and I'm going to go over what to do. If you do have a background in Scratch, especially if you have an account, feel free to get started and start exploring. So I'm going to send this in the chat right now. Feel free to open it up. All right. Let me know if, or put a thumbs up in chat if you were able to open up the link and see kind of a little picture or a coding environment. So everybody, if you can try to open it up on your own screens, that would be awesome. Got a few check marks. Amazing. Thank you so much. And I'm just going to make sure that this is open. And from here, we are going to be doing a few different things. All right, perfect. So let me just share my screen again. So hopefully everybody has a screen that looks like this. And what we're going to do, if you already have an account, that's awesome. And theoretically, you can save whatever code you're doing. If you'd like to make an account, really all you need is an email. And this is basically like a little program that lets you do a few different things. You can press the kind of little flag button to start playing with it and to kind of explore a few different parts. This is just a series of images and a little starting point. So it's easy to kind of work with. And if you press C inside, which is what we're going to do now, you are going to see a bunch of different coding bits. And we're going to explore and build each of the necessary components to make sure that your kind of space station works and we can move certain sections. I'm just going to open up another thing. Give me 1 second. I have a version that's created that is also fully completed. And I'm going to have that in just a different tab. All right. So if you haven't worked with Scratch before, basically what it is, it's a little coding environment that you can do specific things. So the first thing that we're going to actually try to do is we want to be able to move the Canadarm. And what we're going to do is we're going to have something happen in this kind of program. So the first thing that I want you to do is we're going to select the arm, which is what we're actually going to have change. So we are going to have the control, or sorry, the events. In the events, what we're going to pick is when space key is pressed. So you're just going to drag this little guy into the section there. And in here, we are going to press the right arrow. So when you press the right arrow on your keyboard, something's going to happen. And we are going to go into motion. And we're going to change X by 10. So this is kind of the first thing that I want you all to have. Thumbs up in chat or a check mark in chat if we are all working together and we're doing okay so far. We got 2 thumbs up, 3 thumbs up, 4, 5, 7, many thumbs up. We're doing okay. Okay, so when we press right, we are going to do 10 X to the side. And we also have to update the left arrow. Does anybody have any ideas? Can anybody send an idea in chat how we're going to make it move left? If you can try yourself before I give you the answer, that would be awesome. And if you happen to know, put it in chat. So what we're going to do is we are going to press here and we're going to change to the left arrow. So the X direction is side to side. And what we're going to do is we are going to change by, instead of +10, we're going to do -10, which is a nice, easy thing that we're going to do. Any questions so far? Is everybody doing okay? Okay, awesome. So I stopped sharing my screen. Give me a second. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to press the little flag button, and then you're going to try out your code. So you should be able to see your arm moving side to side. And that's kind of the first part. The next thing that we're going to do is when we're starting, we want our arm to start in this exact location. So if you see down here, we've got 2 numbers. So we're going to go to the control section and we're going to move this one over. This just means at the start of the program. So when the flag is clicked or when you start the program, you want the arm to be in the right place. So imagine that I had my program set up and we have the Canadarm floating in the middle. That doesn't really make sense. So what we want to do is we want to have it set at a specific location. And the way that we're going to do that is we are going to press go to. We're going to find the specific location exactly where we want it to be. In this case, I'm going to say 8632. You can pick the specific location that you want it to go. but mine is going to be right here. Check marks or thumbs up if you're following along so far. We've got a few, awesome. So far, we basically have a program that starts in the right position and then moves up or moves right to left. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to move it up and down. So before I give you the answer, I would like all of you to try figuring out what sections we need to build before I actually show you how to do it. And it would be great if when you've done the up and down part, you put a check mark in chat or you give a thumbs up. So I will give you a hint. You need to start with 2 of these sections. And then after that, we're going to move into the next part. All right, is anybody able to either say out loud, unmute your mic and tell me what you think I should change this to for my first one, or you can put it in chat. Does anybody have any ideas of what we're changing in our code to make the Canadarm go up and down? What do we think we should put for this button? Up arrow, awesome. So Karen, Sophia, and Anna, awesome. We're gonna do that together. So we're gonna put the up arrow for the first one, and we are going to change the Y. Perfect. So the Y direction is the up and down. We're gonna find the change the Y. We're gonna put that there. And now for the other one, we are going to change it as well. What should we put for this one? The down arrow, awesome. And what is gonna go in this blue section over here? Change Y, and what's the number that we're gonna change Y by? -10, awesome. We're going to change it by -10. And if you're following along, give your program a little test. You can press the green button to give it a nice little start. And then you can start trying it, see if it's going to work. And when you move it, you can see that now you have full control and you can move it anywhere you like. Thumbs up in chat if you have followed along so far. How are we doing? Awesome. So the next part that we're going to do is we're going to have another event. We're going to have something change. Awesome. I'm not sure if you were intentionally having a chat, but I did mute you, unfortunately, whoever that was. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to change the costume from the Canadarm. So there are 2 different kind of outfits that this should have. And the way that we're going to switch the outfit, once I kind of move this over, I have a lot of little things up on my screen. So we're going to go into looks and we're going to switch the costume to open. Amazing. And then the next step is we're going to go into events. And we're going to let something know something. So we're going to let it know message 1 for now. And message 1 will basically just mean that the arm is open. After we've done that, we're going to add a little bit of a waiting timer. And then we're going to add another one of these little outfit changes. And we're going to switch it to close. So this will basically allow you to open and close your little Canada arm when you press the space bar. But one last thing we need to do is we're also going to make sure that at the beginning it stays closed. So we're just going to make that little update. So in terms of what we're exploring right now, when we press the space button, we're going to switch the costume to open. We're going to broadcast that something's happening. We're going to wait a second, and then we're going to have the arm closed. You can give it a little test in your program. And you can see that when you press space, it's going to start to open and close. Thumbs up if you're following along so far. We've got a few. So I'm going to leave this open so you can all see it for a second. And then we're going to go over to the next section in a second. So the next part that we're going to do is we're actually going to add a little bit more interactivity to the different components. So we need to set each one of the individual parts to be at a specific location at the start. Do you see those little shapes in the images? So if we go over here, what you're going to do is you're going to click on the one that says pentagon. And we are going to set up some special things that are going to happen specifically for this pentagon. So we are going to start at a specific location. So when this is clicked, what you're going to do is pick a location where you want it to start. I'm going to have mine start up here. And if you remember how to do that, how do we make this specific shape start at that location? Can anybody tell me in chat? How do we get this to stay at a specific location? We did the exact same thing for the Canadarm, but now we need to do it for our shapes. Feel free to send your answer in chat. Exactly. So we're going to pick the go-to section. So if you can grab your go-to right here, and then you're going to pick the location. Because I set my location over here, you can see that the numbers are already set up. So we're already good to go. And we're going to do a few specific things to make sure that something happens. So I'm not sure if you remembered back in the arm component, I said message does something. So what we're going to do is we are going to have message have something special happen when we interact with the pentagon. So what we're going to do is when I receive message 1, which is what's happening, we're going to have a few different things happen. I don't actually think that we're going to have enough time to go over everything, but what I will do is I'm going to share the example code with you, or the answer code, I'll say. So the solution to make sure that you're actually doing all the different parts and everything's kind of engaged. I'll walk you through how it works, and then on your own time, you're going to be able to build this out. So let me just stop share and open up the example code. And then I'll also send it to you so you can all kind of explore it. So here is my example code. You can see that the arm we've already finished. It's a little bit different in terms of the coordinates than the one I gave. we have our pentagon. And what's going to happen is instead of message 1, the original version is actually sending the message open. So when this is open, so it's checking if the touching arm is open, and then this is going to go back 1 layer, wait a second, and then go inside of the arm. And the other thing that's going to happen is if this pentagon is touching, then there's going to be a noise that happens, and then the pentagon port is going to kind of move. So it's going to move with the Canadarm. So I'm going to see if I can show you what this looks like. So when I press space, it's going to hold it. And if you can see, it's actually inside and it's moving along with it. And then when we press space again, you can see that it moves. And then we're going to press it again once we move this over. And we have this here. I'm going to show you the additional few components that work similarly. So when we have our circle, you can see the exact same thing is being created. We have a different start location. We have kind of a slightly different checking function. I'm going to move this over here. And then we have our triangle, which is basically the same thing as well. So we have the opening. If it's touching the triangle, then it's going to go to the triangle port, and then it's going to stay in this area. Finally, we have our circles and our triangles, which do not have any code, because all of the code that we're actually writing and creating has to do with the arm moving, it opening and closing, and then the specific components moving into the location. Hopefully this all kind of makes sense. I'll send over this code as well, so you can have a nice little explore. It's always fun to kind of take the things that you're learning and apply them to different situations. And this is one of the things I absolutely love to do. I don't always do scratch coding, so I very seldomly use this. I usually use full language coding, but this is a good way to kind of make things really, really quickly in a simple way. That's often kind of fun. So I'm just going to send that link in chat. Feel free to update your own so that it kind of matches the code that I've created there. And if you have any other questions, feel free to ask me. Hopefully you had a fun time exploring a bunch of different things involving Canadian kind of Nobel Prize winners and scientists and space exploration, and really kind of applying and taking the knowledge in and being able to apply it into different situations. Thank you all so much. And if you have any questions, feel free to stick around. And I hope you have a great rest of your week. Thank you guys so much. It was really fun. And make sure to check out the project, the other one that has all the rest of the code in it. Thank you for everybody who was interacting and gave your answers. I had an awesome time.